should be live, and we are. Okay, so after showing the rescue mission, I decided I was going to go over the code really quickly on stream so you can see what it was doing, because there's some weirdnesses there. There's some things that may or may not be clever, and eventually I want to get into the code that I imported from Kevin's work and what I did to it. And in the process, I, of course, as any engineer would, I refactored the heck out of it. But the code is not shorter, but in some ways it's simpler. The previous iteration of the code was full of function delegates, where each thing that I was calculating was a function delegate. In the end, when you would lock the throttle, it would cascade through the function delegates, and I could be called back every 5 seconds and we would still be bang on. And I think that might have been excessive. Maybe. Just maybe. So I rolled back and I said, hey, let's just calculate the things we need to calculate and figure it out. And if we have to have our function called very frequently, then we'll do that. But this delegates calling delegates thing can't be efficient. I mean, I don't know how clever all of this code is, but yeah. Anyway, so what I want to focus on right now is one specific portion of the rescue mission. We've gotten ourselves into the ready orbit, which is 250 kilometers out, and we've identified our target down at between 80 and 90 kilometers out, and we want to do a burn that will transfer us into their orbit, and we want that burn to be timed so that when we get there, they are right in front of us. Now, I really love doing direct calculations. If I'm going to circularize, I calculate what my change in velocity needs to be, and I go do it. So I like direct calculations, and I like adaptive systems. So in the circularization case, for example, I will calculate what velocity needs to be. I will set my acceleration based on the difference, and as we progress through time, each time I do it, I will get closer to the right velocity, and I will ramp down my acceleration and we'll bang it right on. All direct calculation. But at some point in anything where you're dealing with elliptical orbits, you come to a stage where you have to do things iteratively. You have to put out a guess that is close enough, and then you have to say, what can I do to make this a little bit better, and a little bit better, and a little bit better. So you iteratively adjust. So you take your orbit, you say, make it bigger, no, make it smaller, no, do it this way, no, do it this way, no, do it this way. Now, what triggered me into this, what brought me into this was many years ago, Cheers Kevin did almost everything in his KS programming system that was complicated. He did by doing a hill climbing. Okay, so you would look at a vector which defines what it is you're going to do, and you would tweak the bits of it and see which bits made it better, and then you choose the nearest neighbor and iterate. This is gradient descent, sort of, in that you're always changing just one parameter of your thing you're going to do. He wrote a very good little general package to do it, and we're bringing it in. We're going to use it. But I started thinking about that, and he used it from the start. For instance, when he wanted to circularize, he would fling a maneuver node out there where he wanted to circularize, and then would use this hill climbing to find the version of it that was best. That's great. Thumbs up. It just took a lot longer and ended up being less precise. If you're doing an error correction system, so you're doing an error controller, you're thrusting somehow proportional to your error, you can end up banging it right on to several decimal places better than you can get if you pre-plan a burn and then you try to execute a pre-planned burn. There's an error there. There's an inherent error where you say, well, I want to burn exactly this much in exactly this direction. You're not going to do that exactly, which is why you need an air controller. But for later things, it became a really good idea. There's some things that are very hard to calculate, and one of them is this problem of I am in orbit A, I'm person A in orbit A, and I want to match person B in orbit B. And if you start looking into this, you get to Lambert solvers, you get to pork chop plots. And what they all come down to is you're trying a whole bunch of different alternatives and you're finding the best one. That's hill climbing. Or in a different way of doing it, you might do it with gradient descent, but hill climbing catches the essence of that. What I did for that initial orbit capture, now bear in mind, if I had a perfectly circular orbit and I was going down to a perfectly circular inner orbit and I was sure that I could absolutely be perfect on my maneuvers, you could calculate this directly. You can calculate the Hohmann. Okay, you can do the transfer orbit because you know your altitude here and your altitude there, so you can build the orbit. You know how long that takes, and you can know how long it's going to take the other craft to get to somewhere. You know his angular rate, your angular rate, so you know that if you try this once and you drop it down and you say, what's my angular error? You could take your angular rate and their angular rate, and you can figure out the exact departure time. So bam, one iteration and you've got the right answer. Doesn't work with elliptical orbits. There's all sorts of things that come into this, but the baseline thing is there's no closed form single equation without iteration that will just tell you this stuff. I mean, there are some pretty complex stuff. There's unified formulations, but they still have a couple of terms in them that are take this infinite sum, which you have to sum up. There's no closed form solution for it. And even so, they define the orbit in terms of the affine parameter, and you can convert from the parameter to time, but converting from time to the parameter, you guessed it, is iterative. So long story short, it's taken me almost 10 minutes to get there, but we have to do this iteratively. And I wanted to wait until we had to do something iteratively before I brought this hill climbing stuff in. And the first round of hill climbing I'm going to do, we're going to do it manually. We're not going to use a package. We're not going to use pre-existing code. We're just going to write it directly. So my first thing is I need to create an initial Hohmann transfer. We're trying to build an initial orbit that goes from my orbit to the target orbit and has some error that we can then hill climb to bring to zero. So how do we define this? Well, we are going to have our first independent variable be when do we start? And it turns out that we need to pre-calculate what our final radius is going to be before we can actually build the orbit. We need to guess at what our final radius is going to be. And for that, I'm going to say take the altitude that we're going to rescue at, which we make that decision earlier on. So we actually decide based on our target altitudes, what altitude do we want to end at here? We're going to lock that down early on. We're going to say that's our altitude. So T0 and RF are our input values. We're going to do some computation that will get us our start radius, which depends on starting time. We're going to calculate that because we're going to do this a bunch of times. We're going to be trying a whole bunch of different orbits. We're going to be moving T0 back and forth. So we're going to be recalculating this initial radius because we're going to have it exactly what our radius is because we are not in a circular orbit. We're close, but we're not circular. The other thing that we're going to want to calculate is the ending time of the transfer, which is the start time of the transfer plus half of its period. That period is going to change depending on our start altitude and on our end, but we're going to hold our end constant for this process. And the other thing we're going to want to calculate is our total computed error. So once we've started this transfer and gone 180 degrees around and we're getting to the other side, at the moment we reach that periapsis of that transfer orbit, okay, which is, we hope, tangent to the circular orbit at our target altitude. How far are we? And what we're going to do is we're going to hill climb our starting time around so that our ending point is as close to the target vessel as possible. And I think what's going to happen there is that we will end up with an ending point that is such that, you take the position of the target and you draw a normal out, not from the body, but a normal from its orbit, because its orbit may be eccentric, and that should cross us. And we're going to rock this back and forth until we get really close. And there's no point in fine-tuning our burn past a certain point. We can't control our burn down to the millionth of a meter per second delta V. But that means we can do this. We can jitter it back and forth. So finding a feasible starting point for hill climbing. I'm going to need a trial transfer function, which is going to take our inputs, that's T0 and RF. Those two together plus our orbit is enough for us to generate this trial orbit. Let's take a look at what that math is. These are the things that previously were all done with delegates. I keep forgetting the word. These were all function delegates that called each other. And as a result, things like you would evaluate ship P0 every time you needed it, would evaluate it from scratch. I have lifted out the computations of the ship position, ship velocity, target position, and target velocity up to the top of the file because I wasn't sure how to use the prediction code in KOS. And in fact, having those pulled out allowed me to debug them and get them working. So ship posat gives us the vector from the center of the body to where the ship is. So it's body-centered coordinates. So it's a body, center of the body is the origin of that. So get our ship position and get our initial radius. So R0 depends on T0 because there. So now we have our initial radius. Well, for home in orbit, we need to know our initial radius and our final radius. Okay, and that's enough to do the home in orbit. We have the final radius being brought in. Remember, that was one of our input parameters up here. Now, we can mess with this. Somebody could change X for RF and call trial X for again. So X for RF is an input and T0 is an input. And together they get us R0. They get us the semi-major axis. From the semi-major axis we can get the period. Well, we need to know the period of that orbit so we can calculate how long it's going to take for us to get from here to there. Okay, there it is. And the period, the total period of the orbit is 2 times pi times the square root of the semi-major axis cubed divided by mu. This is because there's a square cube law. The square of the period is proportional to the cube of the semi-major axis. Okay? This is old, ancient knowledge. This is things they knew back in the early days. Kepler, you look him up, read on him. You already know about Kepler. Anyway, so yeah, SMA cubed divided by mu, take the square root, multiply it by pi, and that gets you how long it's going to take for you to get from one end of this transfer to the other. And from that we can calculate the timestamp at the end of the transfer. We know the time we started. That's transfer T0. Remember, T0 is one of the things we're going to rock back and forth, which is the universal time in seconds of when we're going to start. Now we need the universal time in seconds of when we're going to end. And there it is. We're going to use set, so this flings that value out into one of the locals we set up earlier. Okay, so we know when we're going to get there. So now let's work on what our error is going to be. Well, ship. Where's the ship going to be at that time? Well, it's exactly 180 degrees around from where we started. So we take our initial ship position, ship P0, which is from the body to our starting position. We take the negative of it, So now we're pointed the other way. We normalize it so it's length 1, and we multiply it by the ending radius. So now we've got a vector going the other way that's as long as the ending radius, and that is our position at the end of the transfer. Cool. You notice we didn't have to build a maneuver node for this. Maneuver nodes are really clever, and they do a lot of work for you, but every time you create one, you really have to wait until the next physical tick before you look at any of the results from them. So I wanted to do as much of this as possible without, how do I say, without spending a lot of time ping-ponging back and forth with the physics engine. So there's target PF, or ship PF. Target position final. Well, we can directly ask Kerbal Space Program, where is my target vessel going to be at that time? Because the target vessel is on this elliptical orbit. It's actually on rails because KSP pretends that everything is a simple gravitational field, spherically symmetric, single attractive point. So basically the origin and mu define the entire gravitational field. So it can very quickly calculate at what, for any given time in the future where you're going to be. Now, under the covers, remember what I was saying about iterative? Under the covers, it's going to be doing some iterative work, but that's all hidden away from us. We can ignore it the same way we ignore the fact that sometimes when you say square root, there's some iterative stuff going on. So we know where we are, we know where they are, subtract them to get the error vector, okay? And trial transfer, we are most interested in this in getting one scalar number out of it, which is going to be a score that we're going to use for hill climbing. And in this case, I am going to return the error. Now, this has the wrong sign for the hill climbing package we're going to use, but this means I can call trial transfer, and it says, given the T0 and RF, how many meters off am I going to be at the end? And this is something we can put on our heads. This is, what's our error at the end? And I'm going to fold it. Oh, you may notice that my coding style is a little weird here. I've pulled my curly braces up onto the next line, and I'm explicitly putting comment lines in. This is kind of pandering to the way VS Code does region folds. If I got a bracketed section here, and I go over here and I close it like that, if that curly brace is on the same line, it completely disappears. If it's on the next line after the block and extended, it will still show up here. What I wanted to do is I want to be able to close the things like this down to a single line. It says function, trial transfer, run the numbers for yada yada yada. And when I code wide. And it's not just because I spent 4 years battling against Java. So trial transfer, that gets us our error. I may have badly named that one. It should have been calculate final error given T0 and RF initial conditions. And I think I need a strategy and a factory strategy and a factory constructor and a constructor factory. Yeah, anyway. So trial X for try as a transfer gives us back the error. So there's a couple of support routines that I want to have here, and I will open them up when we get to them. So our initial guess is start transferring in 5 minutes to the rescue altitude. Well, we're going to hill climb this, which means it's going to look at where we are, and it's going to say, I'm going to bump my time one way or the other. Which way makes things better? Well, what if making things better is reducing the time, bringing it into the past? I don't want it to hill climb so far into the past that I can't start my burn in time. For instance, if it says my best time to do this was 10 minutes ago, we're out of luck. So what I do is I start rolling time forward 5 minutes at a time until the error gets better. So the air is going to get, if this is past a optimum, the air is going to get worse and worse and worse and worse until it gets to as bad as it can be, and then it'll start getting better. I want to push it out until it starts getting better. Then I'm going to push it out again until it passes the optimum and starts getting worse again. I'm assuming that it's going to take longer than 5 minutes to do this. I want 5 minutes to be some small fraction of that. So when we go until it gets better and then we go until it gets worse, we know that the optimum time is somewhere between where our proposed orbit was here at the end of this guy and where it was at the end of this guy. So we're somewhere after the optimum point to fire, but we're within 5 minutes. This is essentially a one-sided hill climb. Normally hill climbing, you take each axis, each degree of freedom, and you say, look positive and look negative. And whichever one is better, if it's better than where we started, go for it. Okay? In this case, we're saying, look positive. And if we like that one better, go for it. And in this case, we go as long as it's getting worse, we keep going, and when it gets better, we stop. And then we go until, as long as it keeps going better, we keep going until it gets worse, and we stop there. Now, normally hill climbing, if neither of the neighbors are better, it comes back to the middle, and these guys don't do that. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because this is a unique case. It's not something you normally would do in the core of hill climbing. It's weird. So unless somebody has any serious objections and leaves a comment, I'm not going to even open these up. Okay? We've got the idea of trying a potential orbit, and it says try bumping it by another second, try bumping it by another 5 minutes. And this says, oh, that was bad, step back. I don't think we even use rewind. This may be left over. This function isn't used. Okay. I take that back. I will open it up because I'm going to eliminate this particular little function. And this means I can eliminate prev t0 because it's only used here and here. So I've opened it up. I've got to talk about it. Basically, the idea of do something until it's better is save off the previous error, save off current error's previous error, and then say try this time and return true if it's less than previous error. So okay, again, a badly named function. This function does not loop until it's better. It increments and then it determines whether it's better or not. So despite all of the refactoring I did earlier, I am on the point of going and refactoring the heck out of this, and it's not worth it, so we are going to close it back up. But the coding here is simple. It says increment dt, decide whether it's better or not, decide whether we're going to stop or not. And the important thing is that when we get here, we have an initial time and an initial target radius that nail down what our orbit is going to be, such that when we hill climb the time, we're going to find a optimum which is far enough in the future that we can handle it. So I'm going to scroll up. We're going to ignore the rest of that stuff. What are we going to do here? Well, this is where we're going to call into Kevin's code. I've done some modifications to it, but largely it's his code. I'm going to call it Kevin's code because I want to make sure people understand that's where it came from. Hill climb seek says we have a vector here that defines the parameters of something that's going to happen. We have a delegate to a function that says if I do that thing defined by that data vector. How good is it? Is that actually going to maximize the fitness? So it's the fitness function for the burn vector. And this can be anything. We can define it any way we want. This could be cooking an egg for that long and deciding how runny the yolk is. It could be running through some mathematical formulas and returning whether it's a solution to an equation or not. Or it could be taking the data in this vector and pushing it into a maneuver node and evaluating the difference between where we end up and where we want to be. That's where we're going with this. And step size, well, the way you hill climb in this code is you've got a vector, and for each component of the vector, we're going to look at the neighbors of the vector. That is, for each component, we're going to look at the vector with that component positive and negative by the step size. So if there's 4 components of the vector, we've got 8 neighbors. We're going to choose the neighbor that has the best fitness, and if it's better than the fitness of the one we started with, we're going to accept it. So seek does that over and over and over again until none of the neighbors are better, and then it returns the final vector at the end. Seek does this for one specific step size. And I'm going to do something that I remember being called synthetic annealing. And I'm sure that people will Google synthetic annealing and say, oh no, that's not it at all. But what I'm trying to do here is think of this hill climbing as an energetic particle, a heated particle that's jumping around to various spots, and you're looking at where it jumps to. And if it jumps to some place that it's better, it sticks there and then it starts jumping again. But over our iterations, we're going to iterate through, and once we find no place better, we're going to cool the particle so it doesn't jump as far. So we're going to start out plus or minus 30, plus or minus 10, plus or minus 3, 1, and so on all the way down. There are probably all sorts of ways to pick an optimum series of step sizes that will minimize the number of total iterations. And I bet you it's something like, you divide by phi or something, 1.6 whatever it is it's a strange number where 1 plus phi minus 1 is 1 over phi, the golden ratio. I would bet that comes into it. But in this case, I've found that roughly, doing it by powers of 10, I iterated a lot. Doing it by powers of square root of 10, I terminated a lot faster. And this is fast enough. I mean, even if I were iterating on 4 different components, which have done, that's iterating in maneuver node where you're free to change the time and the 3 burns. Even with that, if you go down by roughly square root 10, it's not bad. I've tried doing it by 2. If you cut it in half each time, pretty much at each layer you are iterating once or twice, because that gets you back to where you were. Sometimes you will iterate along one direction, then you iterate the other direction farther. If you've got a very sharp slope, you may go down the slope a step and then find out that it has tilted to where now you can go a long way another direction. For really complex problem topologies, you really want to use a gradient descent, because you can adapt to that stuff. But in this case, this is perfect. So we hill climb at smaller and smaller values until we finally come to a burn where if we take any of the components that we're trying to tune and we change them by 1/100th, by 0.01, we don't get any better. And in this case, this component I'm manipulating is the delta V, and it's questionable whether you can control your delta V for total burn down that level. So the only reason I go that far is because that gives me something to shoot for. If I went to 0.1, maybe I could have been more precise. Also, it means that I can, if I'm mainly going one direction, this 0.01 might change the direction. I might have better angular control than that. Going smaller than 0.01 didn't seem to get me any better results. This is all empirical. This is all stuff where you try something and it doesn't work, and you make it better. It doesn't work, and you make it better. It's the Kerbal way. So that gets me our initial burn. In this case, you'll notice here's burn fit. Here's my fitness function. It's passed in as a delegate, so burn fit is going to be called for every candidate. I need it to be fast, but it's, yeah. So we actually reused xfer-dt try from up above. I forgot about that. I can't eliminate this because this logic I need to actually execute. No, I don't, because I'm passing in a 0, so this is setting T0 to T0. We're just calling trial xfer. So how about I just directly call trial xfer here. There. I may be able to get rid of those yet. So burnFit says the first parameter, I only have one parameter in my state vector, but the first parameter of the state vector is going to be when to start burning. So this is a degenerate system. Hill climb is overkill for this particular problem. We only have one axis. It's going to say plus or minus A. It's going to step forward by A. It's going to plus or minus A. Well, we're doing twice as much work, but it works and it's easy to set up. So we're going to set T0 to the date in the burn, and we're going to do the trial transfer, and we're going to say, here's this. Now, nowhere here have we set this up as a maneuver node yet, so we're still not waiting for the physics engine. So this part, tuning the start time, is very fast. When they're done, we have this X for T0 that we've settled on as being, this is the time we want to burn. Now at this point, notice earlier we put a stake in the ground that says, here's our destination radius. Now I'm going to stake down and lock down this burn time. And we're going to lock this down permanently. This is going to be where we do our burn. Even if it turns out not to be the best possible time, because at this point changing the time isn't going to change a whole lot. You'll see what's happening later. Perhaps in the future when we have highly eccentric things we're trying to intercept, we may look at that. So we lock T0 down to the burn. But we have been sending ourselves to a rather tall radius. The SMA of the target, the target could be anywhere, and the more eccentric its orbit is, the farther it could be from there. And its exact position is going to depend on our transit time. Our transit time is going to depend on its exact position. Here's where the hill climb will come in handy. Close that off. I'm going to create a actual maneuver node. And I'm going to start it off at our selected time. I'm going to feed it the initial delta V in the prograde direction. If it's negative, it'll be the retrograde direction. The correct delta V that would take our vessel at whatever speed it's working. I'm going to assume our speed is lateral. Okay, so again, delta V is, this dV is just an initial estimate. So we say we are starting here at the ship position at time 0 magnitude. That's our radius. Our destination, we're going to look at the actual target position at the time we expect to get there. X for TF. Now notice that TF is computed from the rest of this stuff, so there's a feedback loop going on here if we're not careful. And the delta V is figure out the velocity we should be at the start of our transfer. What velocity do we need to be at? What speed actually do we need to be at to be on this orbit? And it's an entirely lateral velocity, so we can take the speed and poke it out the lateral direction. There we go. So we can take our speed. We're going to assume that our ship's velocity is also lateral, so we're going to subtract off our ship speed. And that's going to be our initial dV. All we need is an estimate here. This doesn't need to be exact. So what's our fitness function? Well, our fitness function is going to be take the first element of the burn vector and put it in the prograde delta V. So I am going to constrain this problem. We are not going to tune the time. We're only going to tune the prograde burn. So this is going to be an entirely prograde or retrograde turn. So it'll be prograde if we're rescuing something above us, and retrograde if we're rescuing someone below us. And we don't need to think about that because that's all baked into the sign. So we set our prograde burn, and then we wait. That's what I was talking about the physics engine. We have to wait so that we loop through one cycle, and when we come back, we can now look at the node and find out things from it. Like, hey, if I ask for my ship's position in the future and we've got a maneuver node, it's going to take into account that maneuver node. So now I can say at the assumed end time of the transfer, which we haven't changed, what is our error? Now, as we start adjusting the transfer, it could very well be that TF, our end time, is not going to be actually the end of this line through the center of the body. It may not be the time of periapsis or apoapsis of the transfer. It's just at that exact time. So we are saying we want to meet up with our target vessel at that exact time. Now, if we ever change TF, then okay, it would do it. But we're not going to change TF because now we're just going to mess with the node. We're going to update the node, and we're going to find out what our target error is. And that, again, I think we have called that method before, that says look at our ship's position at that time, look at our target position at that time, compare the two. We're going to ask our hill climber to adjust our prograde burn to be the appropriate value that minimizes that. Okay, so we should be fairly close at that point. We could, in reality, I could start off with a burn vector that includes two components, and I could say don't just hill climb the prograde vector, but I could also hill climb the radial vector. That gets us another freedom, another direction, another degree of freedom in our solution. We could go with the third one, which would do the normal, but because we're going 180 degrees around, if we burn normally, mainly that affects our orbital inclination along the radial line, and it won't affect our position at the other end very much, but it's very expensive. So we do not want to try to tune the normal here. We'll do that later. But that means we're going to have a correction burn. We can fix a lot of stuff in the correction burn, so let's just do the simple thing here, and we are going to tune just our radial. So our first burn is going to be a pure, so we just tune the prograde. So we're going to be a pure prograde or retrograde burn. Now, to make this work, I want to remove any node that was there before. We do not play well with pre-existing nodes. Oh no. If there's a maneuver node between us and when we want to do this, we would not be able to control things. We would be fighting against it. And if it's afterwards, we're going to invalidate it. So we're just going to remove any nodes that are there. We're going to add a node at the correct time, and we'll be filling in parameters in there. And then we're going to build this state vector, which starts out with our delta V. And just like before, we do hill climbs using our DV, using our fitness function, and running the step size down from 30 down to 1/100th. And this runs fairly quickly, and it fairly quickly tunes our prograde burn to take it, to correct for the fact that we started off going to the wrong altitude. So now this changes it so we've got the right altitude. And in the end, I am not absolutely sure whether Hill Climb Seek guarantees that the last evaluation it did was the best one. Yeah, you look at the code and it says, look at each neighbor, evaluate each neighbor, take the maximum of those, and then it evaluates the center again. Well, it does the evaluation of best versus the evaluation of the center. It may be that it does those in the order we like. It may be that it does them in the other order. Don't know. Probably shouldn't care. So when we're all done, I'm going to unpack our burn vector back out into the nodes. So this looks like this. And we're going to wait. And actually, what would be even better would be, don't repeat yourself. I am going to replace this code with just calling burn fit. Now, I want to make sure, if I print this value out, I want to make sure that later when I remove the print, I don't remove the burn fit. So I add a comment in here. Oops, almost forgot burn. But the other thing I want to do is print. Actually, let's do local. Oh, wait a minute. Set. You know what? I think ship target error at. Does that actually set my global? Nope, it doesn't. I do have the notion of a current error elsewhere, so I'm going to see if I have that. Yes, cur E. Let's set current error to fit burn, and then I'm going to print it out so we can see it. What do I want to call this? Now, cur E is an error in meters. I don't really care about lots of decimal places. Let's say round of cur E. So we'll print that out to the 10th of a meter. It's probably going to be on the order of hundreds of meters, just as a guess. I have seen these algorithms nail it down to under a meter. I have seen missions go by where we come screaming in and we are backing down and slowing down and we just tap the target. And we send it tumbling. Well, start it tumbling. Interestingly enough, we tap it just barely and it's just enough to cause it to tumble and not enough to make it scoot. So sometimes this stuff works really well. I actually had to detune this, so I'm trying to stop 20 meters before the target because I used to just tap the target. Anyway, so current E for the mission burn, and when that's done, I want to persist some of the data so that I can use those numbers, the start time, the final time, and a time that I am going to pick right now to perform a correction burn. So when I committed to this burn, I'm also going to commit to when I want to do my correction. So if we're here and we're going to go all the way around to here to do the rescue, I want to do my correction halfway in between. That will get me a good point to burn. For example, if my inclination was off, I want to burn normal to correct that. I may want to burn prograde or radial out to correct other things about my approach. And that's all part of this rendezvous transfer. So we've initiated the transfer at this point. The correction burn is so much simpler. Even though we have run long on this one, I'm going to go ahead and cover the correction burn as well, because there's the whole thing. So we've planned our maneuver node for our transfer. We have a execution phase which is tucked away somewhere else that uses a bit of code that I adapted again from Kevin to execute a maneuver node, and that works. Let's assume it works. I'll cover that one in another video. So we got on. We got approximately onto our transfer. You never do this exactly. So we got onto our transit orbit, and we're headed for there, and we came pretty close to where we're supposed to be, but we're not exact. And we get halfway there, and we want to do a correction burn to really nail it in. And the idea is that halfway down, a small burn that's tractable. It's small, so we're efficient, but it's not tiny, so we do have fine control. It's not like a little tenth of a second boop is going to toss us off by a kilometer. Okay, so what do? Well, possibly we rebooted during this time. I mean, there could be a several hour gap between when we got on the trajectory and when we're doing the correction. So we pick up our final time and our correction time, so we know what the timestamps are for when we should do the correction, and the timestamp for when we expect to match with the target. Okay. First thing is, if we were asleep too long, let's say your venerable flight engineer was off fiddling around with another satellite trying to get it to go back into its orbit and didn't get back in time, we may have to abort this rescue and try again with a new vessel. And there's a rescue abort thing that actually shortcuts through the rest of our mission plan to bring us back down so we can try again. If we pass this, we know we've got at least 10 seconds before the time when we're supposed to do the correction. That should be enough time for us to plan a correction and lock it down. Now, normally we'll do it much earlier. So the first time we call this, we could do this. So as soon as we get to this transfer orbit and we're on rails, nothing about this math is going to change. So we do this as early as possible. This could happen right after we finish the burn. In fact, normally it will happen right after we finish doing the maneuver burn. We'll come right in here and boom, we'll do this. As with the previous one, we don't play well with pre-existing maneuver nodes. So get rid of any maneuver nodes that are out there and create a new dummy maneuver node at the exact time we want to do our correction maneuver. We will not be adjusting the time. I played with allowing the hill climbing to adjust this time, and unfortunately sometimes it would adjust the time to be either before the current time or after we were supposed to match. So we're gonna lock it down to this correction time, and here's our correction vector. We are going to be hill climbing in 3 dimensions. So these 3 numbers we're going to tune are the amount of prograde burn, the amount of radial outward burn, and the amount of normal burn. And because we don't know what our error is going to be at the end, we could have wobbled around arbitrarily when we were getting onto this orbit. Our error could be any direction. So we're going to allow the correction burn to burn in any direction we want. Our fitness function says load the first element into prograde, the second element into radial out, third element in normal. Wait a tick so that the physics engine has a chance to stabilize this maneuver node, and then ask what is our ship target error at that time, TF. So again, independent of what the shape of the orbit is and where it may or may not have periapsis and apoapsis, we are demanding that it find a solution that minimizes the error at our selected final time. This is one reason why I end up looking into Lambert solvers, because this really is doing a subset of part of the Lambert problem. It's saying I have a start time, I have an end time, what's the orbit between here and there? And what I'm really doing is, well, how do I need to bang on my current orbit to get on that particular trajectory? And my headset just beeped at me. And again, once we've got this, guess what we do? Hill climb seek, our burn vector, which is going to get tweaked by hill climb. We've got our fitness function, which we just defined, which is tweak the maneuver node and ask how far we are, and our step size, which we're going to run from big to tall, from large to small. At the end of it, there's our burn fit. And notice that this is the same thing I did up here, with the exception being that I knew I had to call burn fit, and I didn't think in terms of, hey, wouldn't it be nice to print it out? Whoops, that's the wrong place. Sometimes when I scroll around, I don't get back to where I thought I was going to be. So the current E for intercept correction, burn. So we're going to print it there. Hold on, let me fix my battery. There we go. And that's all of it. I think the rest of this video is just going to be letting the mission crank off again. I have rewound to a save where we were doing our second rescue mission. I actually have run a bunch of the actual progress that I've made in the save. I have 11 Kerbals now because this just worked that well. So let's actually fire this up and let her rip. We have one contract for Moden Kerman. Yes, there it is on the screen. And if I check my scripting for A02, there's the rescue, which targets Moden's debris. So let's take VS Code off the screen and make sure we have space for him in the capsule. Yep, Donmond is going to go get him. And we are going to launch. So the thing to pay attention to here is when we are transferring from our parking orbit at 250 kilometers down to match. And as we saw in the overview video that I did, oh, do I need to put a flash warning in? Yikes. This will actually automatically change over to map mode, but let's go there anyway. And a focused view on Kerbin. If I do that early enough, I don't mess things up. Some of this code is dependent upon having the rescue thing targeted, not just knowing what it is. And if you double click around to change focus, it messes with the target. In this case, it didn't. I never know when it's going to change the target. It probably has to do with the timing of the clicks. But if you untarget it at just the wrong time, it'll end up crashing KSP. Oh, excuse me, crashing my code running inside KOS, running inside KSP. And now we watch. Again, keep your eyes open for that transfer from our 250 kilometer orbit down to the orbit that Moden is on. Now we only have the one rescue mission. We still have Donman's capsule up there. That's empty. We could actually go to the Space Center and get rid of it. In the actual save for the career, I went ahead and got rid of the capsules after I got the Kerbals out of them, the capsules, the debris, the whatever. Some of them were in capsules, some of them were in like nose cones of aircraft. A couple were in, I guess, airplane fuselages be the best way to describe them. It's the cylindrical piece with the airplane windows on it. All just kind of tumbling around up there. Okay, so as our apoapsis grows, you notice that it has, now KSP itself has identified that we are crossing over the target orbit. Now, these markers, these are not closest encounter markers as I thought they were. They're just, this is where your orbit intersected its orbit, and this is where it was when you intersected. So you could end up with markers out here, so bling bling and bling bling for your crossover points, and your actual closest approach ends up right in the middle. These guys are saying, oh, we're 3 or 4 kilometers out when I'm crossing the orbit. And in here, you're 150 meters perpendicular from it. So closest approach is what I wanted. And I'm glad I didn't figure out a way of querying what these little markers were, because they are not the number I wanted. Okay, so there's our apoapsis. It's grown to 250 kilometers. And now we circularize. Again, I'm using the direct computation and error control methods. So I'm basically saying, if I were in a circular orbit, what would my velocity be? What is my velocity? Burn to correct. Over and over and over again. And it's wherever I am. I don't make an effort to say, make sure I am circularizing at my apoapsis, because then I would have to do all the burns at 0 time. So sometime just before I get there, I start doing this process, and it will give me a circular orbit near my wherever I am when I start. So matching inclination, it just turns out by chance that for this launch, when you get circularized, you are very near the ascending node of his orbit relative to my orbit. So we waited for us to be under his plane, and we ended up going a little beyond it, so we're a little beyond. Anyway, we ended up being almost exactly the same, but not quite. And apparently our nodal correction was so small that we just moved onward. We have planned our burn, and it says our total error, remember Cur-E, this is the fitness function's return value, so this is the negative of meters. So this says that our initial burn for orbital insertion should bring us about 3.7 kilometers away. That's not really close. But we're going to correct anyway, right? You see it flickering around. That flickering, every time we change the node, it has to redraw it. So it flickers as it goes, and this says that our correction burn should bring us 7.4 meters from the target. If we burn perfectly, and here's the actual maneuver node. Can I get it to show the numbers? Yes, I can. So here's the actual burn. So it's 7.38 and minus 0.24 and 4.85. So it's going to point me in that direction. We see where the blue cross is down here on the nav ball. And boom, there it is. And I told it to get us out of map mode when I got there, and now it's going to do what you saw in the previous iteration. I think the code that says stop between 10 and 20 meters away on this initial approach, I think that's actually new, but that's just adding in an offset to the old code. So we are coming in toward the target, tail first, because we are going to burn to slow ourselves down. First burn, we're only interested in canceling our velocity in our prograde direction until they are lateral to us. So once they are no longer in front of us on that plane, that's where we're stopping. But we're doing it 20 meters ahead. So if we happen to be coming in straight at the target, we wouldn't hit it. Second step is we command a velocity toward it, and the velocity toward it is proportional to how far away from it we are. So we have to accelerate to that velocity, and then coming in, we are decelerating very, very slowly. We are running this engine at a very tiny fraction of its output. At some point we'll have RCS jets, and I will look into writing a controller for the RCS to bring us in on RCS jets. That's a little harder. It's not a matter of point and click, it's a matter of know what direction you're going and then command the RCS thrust in the various directions in the coordinate frame of your vehicle. So you can thrust forward and left and right, up and down. So there we are now in our heroic rescue pose, all oriented so that I can bring Moden out of his debris. And we managed to do it without touching the debris. So previously you saw that when we came in, the debris was tumbling. Well, that's because we touched it as we came in. This time we didn't touch it. So hit the bracket to switch to this. Now our KOS is still running. We're still close enough to hear that it's still running. If we were moving, and this happened a lot earlier on, our main vessel might suddenly decide to maneuver. So it's now in a state where it gets us very close and very slow and in the pose. It stays in the pose until we are much farther away or moving much faster. So there's a lot of tolerance for this. So Moden goes EVA, and I can release and turn on my jetpack, and even I can do this. I am actually not very good at the EVA thing. I was tempted to actually break out my flight stick just so that I could have a little better EVA control. Keyboard just isn't right for this. Grab it, and I climb up a little bit and I can board. There we go. So we've departed, and Moden's debris is still in the same orbit it was in. It's still not moving relative to us. Well, it's moving at 0.1 meters per second. We may have kicked it a little bit as we got out. I don't know. Let's go back to orbital on here and hit the abort group. And the rest of this is exactly the same as you've seen before. So we can stop the recording here. It has been a little over twice as long as I wanted to spend on this, and we're done. I think in the... Oh, I didn't show Kevin's code and my mods. Okay, so what I'll do is the next video I will spend looking at the actual hill climb code, which should be quick. It's not that complicated. Kevin really simplified the heck out of it, made it really super sweet, super simple, and super easy to follow. And while I've junked it up a bit, I don't think I made it much worse. And then we'll spend some time looking at the code to execute maneuver nodes. We kind of glossed over it there. We executed some maneuver nodes there, and they just worked. So we'll go over that code. There's a couple of tweaks there. I generalized things a little bit. And that video probably won't have any flights in it at all. Feel free to skip it. I will try to edit the description of it when we're done to say whether there were any actual... Oh, goodness. There goes my fins. Oh, no. I'll try to edit the description of it to indicate whether there was actually any flying. Executing a maneuver node happens so quickly. It's hard to show anything on the screen. It just happens. You point in the direction, and time comes up, and you go blip, and you're done. Anyway, see you in the next one.